serve a just God, and I rest easy in knowing that He's sovereign, but He's just. And so let the Lord handle that.
Would Charlie have forgiven his killer?
He's in heaven.
When they bring this back up, what are we supposed to do? Relive that trauma all over again? No, at this point, it's what the conspiracy collection. Get it before Christmas. Look, stop in the name of God.
Amen.
What if everything you thought you knew about Erika Kirk was carefully curated, and the real story was hiding in plain sight? For months, her name has floated through headlines, viral clips, and whispered allegations age, one more confusing than the last. To some, Erika is a grieving woman caught in circumstances beyond her control. To others, she's a master strategist who knew far more than she ever admitted. But here's the part nobody can seem to agree on. When did the truth actually stop and the performance begin? From resurfaced footage to deleted scenes that allegedly never made it to the final cut, the timeline around Erika Kirk is full of gaps, contradictions, and moments that don't add up. Why were certain details glossed over? Who benefited from the silence? And why do insiders keep changing their stories just when public attention starts to fade? As more documents, testimonies, and uncomfortable questions emerge, one thing becomes impossible to ignore. This case isn't just about grief, controversy, or scandal. It's about power, control, and the narratives we're told to believe. Because if even half of what's being whispered is true, then the curious case of Erika Kirk may be far darker and far more calculated than anyone was prepared for. From the very beginning, something about the Erika Kirk story felt unfinished. Not incomplete in the sense of missing information, but unfinished in the way a sentence trails off just before revealing its meaning. The public was given fragments, emotional sound bites, and carefully framed moments. Yet the full picture never quite came into focus. And as time passed, instead of clarity, more contradictions began to surface. At first glance, Erika Kirk appeared exactly as the narrative presented her, a woman caught in extraordinary circumstances, navigating grief, scrutiny, and overwhelming public attention. Interviews painted her as emotional, vulnerable, and misunderstood. Supporters rallied behind her, arguing that she was being unfairly targeted by speculation and internet cruelty. Critics, meanwhile, insisted that too many details didn't add up. The divide grew sharper with every new clip, statement, or leak. The earliest public appearances were key. Erika's tone shifted subtly depending on the platform and audience. In one setting, she appeared soft-spoken and reflective. In another, defensive and unusually controlled. Observers began pointing out how certain questions were deflected rather than answered, often redirected toward emotion instead of facts. Grief can explain hesitation, but it doesn't explain inconsistencies in timelines. Then there was the issue of proximity and access. Erika's closeness to powerful institutions and influential figures raised eyebrows. How did she gain such platforms so quickly? Why were some media outlets unusually protective, while others aggressively critical? The uneven coverage suggested more than coincidence. It hinted at competing interests, each attempting to shape the public's understanding of who Erika Kirk really was. As online researchers began digging, older footage and social media posts resurfaced posts that contradicted later claims. Statements about finances, relationships, and intentions didn't always align with earlier versions of events. Screenshots circulated, then disappeared. Videos were flagged, taken down, or quietly edited. Each deletion only intensified suspicion. In the digital age, erasure often speaks louder than exposure. One of the most controversial elements involved Erika's alleged motivations. Supporters argued she was simply surviving, doing what she could to stay afloat amid tragedy. Detractors, however, claimed there was a calculated pattern: strategic interviews, monetized appearances, and carefully timed revelations that coincided with peaks in public interest. The question wasn't whether she benefited, but whether that benefit was intentional. Money inevitably became part of the conversation. Donations, sponsorships, legal funds, and partnerships emerged, sometimes without transparent explanations. When asked directly, responses were vague or emotional rather than factual. Again, grief was cited. But critics countered that grief does not negate accountabilities, especially when public trust and financial support are involved. Another layer of complexity came from those around Erika: friends, associates, and supposed insiders told stories that didn't fully align with hers or with each other's. Some walked back statements. Others went silent altogether. A few hinted cryptically that not everything is what it seems, without providing concrete proof. These half-statements fueled speculation while stopping just short of confirmation, creating an atmosphere of perpetual uncertainty. What made this situation even more unsettling was the moral framing. Erika often positioned herself as being under attack, which reframed criticism as cruelty. In doing so, legitimate questions were sometimes dismissed as harassment. This tactic, intentional or not, effectively shut down deeper scrutiny. Anyone asking for clarity risked being labeled heartless or conspiratorial. Yet the questions persisted. Why did certain key events shift dates depending on the telling? Why were some individuals emphasized in one version of the story and erased in another? Why did legal language appear in casual statements, as if crafted with caution rather than candor? These weren't the kinds of discrepancies that fade with time. They multiplied. Perhaps the most telling aspect of the Erika Kirk case was the emotional whiplash. One moment, audiences were urged to empathize deeply. The next, they were warned not to ask too much. Transparency was promised, but rarely delivered. Each final statement seemed to open the door to another chapter rather than close it. As the narrative expanded, a broader theme emerged: control. Control over the story. Control over access. Control over what was framed as truth versus rumor. Whether Erika herself orchestrated this control, or whether it was managed by advisors, lawyers, or institutions acting in their own interest, remains unclear. But control, undeniably, was present. The internet, as always, became both judge and archive. Independent analysts broke down body language, word choice, and patterns of behavior. While some of this veered into speculation, other analyses were grounded in documented contradictions. The challenge for the public became separating genuine inquiry from sensationalism, a task made harder by the lack of straightforward answers. By the end of this first phase, one conclusion was unavoidable. The Erika Kirk story was no longer just about a single individual. It had become a case study in modern narrative warfare, where emotion, media access, and timing can outweigh facts, and where silence can be as strategic as speech. And this was only the beginning, because as more documents surfaced, as more voices came forward, and as pressure mounted from both supporters and skeptics, the question shifted from, is Erika Kirk telling the truth, to something far more unsettling. If parts of the story were shaped, staged, or suppressed, who helped do it and why? By the time the public began questioning Erika Kirk's story, the conversation was no longer centered on her alone. Attention shifted outward toward the people, platforms, and systems that seemed to orbit her at just the right moments. Because stories like this rarely survive on emotion alone. They are sustained by access, protection, and influence. One of the most striking elements was how quickly Erika gained visibility in high-impact spaces. Interviews weren't just frequent, they were strategic. Appearances often followed moments of heightened public interest, almost as if timed to redirect the narrative before skepticism could take hold. When controversy peaked, a sympathetic platform appeared. When questions intensified, silence followed. This pattern repeated often enough that coincidence became harder to accept. Media alignment played a critical role. Certain outlets framed Erika exclusively as a victim, rarely pressing her on inconsistencies. Others, often smaller or independent, attempted deeper scrutiny and were dismissed as agenda-driven or harmful. The imbalance was telling. In modern media ecosystems, protection doesn't always look like overt censorship. It looks like selective amplification. Behind the scenes, legal language quietly entered the picture. Statements grew more careful, phrased with conditional wording and disclaimers. Phrases like "to the best of my knowledge" and "at this time" became frequent. Observers noted how answers seemed designed not to clarify but to limit liability. This raised a crucial question. Was Erika being guided, and if so, by whom? Then there were the intermediaries, managers, advocates, friends turned spokespeople who spoke on her behalf. These individuals often contradicted one another, unintentionally exposing fractures in the narrative. One would claim Erika wanted privacy. Another would announce a new public project days later. One suggested she was overwhelmed. Another hinted at long-term planning. These mixed messages suggested a lack of unified treating time. Truth, or a struggle to maintain one. Financial entanglements added further complexity. As attention grew, so did monetization opportunities. Donations, partnerships, and brand-adjacent appearances emerged. Sometimes framed as support, other times as opportunity. Critics weren't questioning survival, they were questioning transparency. When money enters a tragedy-driven narrative, clarity becomes essential. Instead, details remained murky. Equally concerning was the silence of certain key figures. Individuals who were present during pivotal moments either declined to speak or abruptly distanced themselves. A few hinted at discomfort, suggesting they were advised to stay quiet. Silence, in this context, didn't feel accidentally, felt managed. The online reaction mirrored this tension. Supporters aggressively defended Erika, often echoing identical talking points. Skeptics noticed how dissenting posts were reported en masse, buried, or labeled misinformation even when sourced from Erika's own earlier statements. This created an environment where questioning felt risky, and consensus felt manufactured. What emerged was not proof of guilt, but proof of orchestration. Someone or something was actively shaping the flow of information. Whether to protect Erika, protect institutions, or protect reputations remained unclear. But the coordination was evident. Perhaps the most unsettling realization was how effectively emotion was weaponized. Every attempt at factual examination was reframed as cruelty. Grief became a shield, understandably powerful, but dangerously absolute. In that framing, accountability became taboo. By the end of Part 2, the case had transformed. This was no longer just about whether Erika Kirk told the full truth. It was about how modern narratives are engineered, how visibility, silence, and sympathy can be strategically deployed to outpace facts, and with more voices preparing to speak. One reality became unavoidable. If this network existed to support the story, what happens when it begins to crack? Every carefully constructed story has stress points, moments where pressure exposes what polish was meant to hide. For Erika Kirk, those moments didn't arrive all at once. They came in fragments, a resurfaced clip here, a quiet contradiction there. A former ally suddenly choosing distance over defense. Individually, each seemed manageable. Together, they formed cracks that could no longer be ignored. The first fractures appeared when older material resurfaced that conflicted with later. Statements, timelines shifted. Descriptions of key events changed subtly but meaningfully. What had once been framed as spontaneous now appeared planned. What was described as confusion later sounded like certainty. These weren't dramatic reversals, but they were precise enough to raise concern. Consistency, after all, is difficult to fake over time. Then came the near silences. After periods of intense visibility, Erika would disappear from public view just as questions peaked. When she returned, the narrative had narrowed, fewer details, tighter framing, and a stronger emphasis on emotional impact rather than factual clarification. Supporters saw this as self-protection. Critics saw it as damage control. Both interpretations pointed to the same reality. The story was being managed. More telling were the voices that stopped speaking. Individuals who had once defended Erika enthusiastically either softened their stance or withdrew entirely. Some deleted posts. Others offered vague statements about not having the full picture. One or two hinted carefully that they felt misled. These weren't enemies or outsiders. They were insiders. And insiders don't disengage without reason. Independent analysts also began connecting dots that had previously seemed unrelated. Patterns in language, repeated phrases across different platforms, and synchronized timing of statements suggested coordination. Whether this coordination was defensive or deceptive remained an open question, but its existence became increasingly difficult to deny. Perhaps the most damaging moment came when Erika was asked a simple, direct question and failed to answer it consistently across different appearances. The contradiction wasn't explosive. It was quiet. And quiet contradictions are often the most revealing because they lack the chaos that can be blamed on stress or misunderstanding. Public perception began to shift not dramatically, steadily. Sympathy remained, but certainty eroded. Even supporters started adding qualifiers. If everything is true, assuming she didn't know, unless more comes out. These conditional defenses marked a turning point. Faith had become provisional. By this stage, the Erika Kirk case was no longer about proving guilt or innocence. It was about credibility, about whether the story presented was the fullest version of the truth, simply the most survivable one. What remained undeniable was this: too many things had changed, disappeared, or gone unexplained for the narrative to stand untouched. The performance, if there was one, had grown harder to maintain. And if there was no performance, only chaos, then transparency would have been the simplest solution. It never came. As the dust settled. One final question lingered in the public consciousness. Was Erika Kirk at the center of a manipulated narrative, or merely a participant who lost control of it? The answer may not arrive in a single revelation, but fractures have a way of widening. And once a story begins to break, it rarely does so quietly. You've hit the free plan limit for GPT-5. Responses will use another model until your limit. Resets after 4:55 p.m. Upgrade to Gotha. Curious Case of Erika Kirk isn't just a story, it's a mirror reflecting how narratives are shaped, controlled, and questioned in the digital age. We've seen how carefully curated appearances, strategic silences, and orchestrated messaging can sway public perception, blur the line between fact and speculation, and create a narrative that feels complete until cracks appear. But the responsibility doesn't lie solely with those at the center. It lies with us, the audience. Stay vigilant. Question what you're told. Look beyond headlines and viral clips to the documents, timelines, and voices that may have been muted or ignored. Don't let emotion alone dictate judgment. Seek context, examine contradictions, and consider who benefits from the story as it's being presented. If you're following Erika Kirk's story or any story that dominates public attention, engage critically. Share verified information, hold platforms accountable, and encourage transparency. Your attention has power. It can demand truth over convenience. Because in a world where narratives can be engineered, your curiosity and scrutiny are the most reliable tools. Don't just consume the story, understand it, dissect it, and join the conversation shaping the truth.